And we're continuing with the 7th chapter of The Embroidered Sunset by Joan Aiken. Chuckling a little, she turned and groped her way along the wall to the dining room. Lucy was somewhat dismayed. "Are you sure you want to come here, Aunt Fen?" she said, piloting Aunt Fennel out to the car. "They seem rather a quarrelsome lot." "Oh, old people always quarrel, dearie," Aunt Fennel replied placidly. "It's the same in any home, however it's run. Quarreling's what keeps them alive, you know." Lucy was impressed, as so often, by the old woman's sudden flashes of insight. Just the same, something troubled her about the atmosphere of Wildfell Hall, something intangible and hard to pin down. It was not the feud between the old ladies, not their attitude, half defensive, half perpetuating, toward the matron. It was not the faint threat implicit in Mrs. Marsham's disciplinary suggestion, but a combination of all three things and something else besides, which seemed to give the place a faint sour flavor, like the anonymous, chemical, vaguely disquieting smell of a laboratory. "I'm probably imagining it," decided Lucy. "Old people's homes are always full of ornery old cusses missing the families they used to boss about. It would take a saint not to get mad at them at times, and plainly Mrs. Marsham's no saint. Still, she seems sensible enough. Anyway, if I'm there for a week or so, there'll be time to get the feel of the place. And then, if it really doesn't seem right, I can easily whistle Aunt Fen out of it and take her down south, maybe, and find somewhere near where I'm staying with Max." But Aunt Fennel certainly seemed quite pleased with Wildfell Hall. "Alice Crabtree," Aunt Fennel said meditatively. "She always was headstrong and wilful. Even as a girl, I remember the time Lenny Thorpe— No, what am I thinking? It'll have been Lenny Thorpe's father, of course, Sam Thorpe. He dared her to go in a Galloway's field. He dared her to go to Galloway's field, where the bull was kept. How they ever got her out alive, it took 5 men to keep that bull at bay, and one of them had his leg broke." "You know Mrs. Crabtree, then?" "Oh, yes, dearie, she always lived at Apley. She and I were never close friends, of course, but I shan't object to a chat with her now and then." Aha, thought Lucy, here's a first-hand witness coming up. Someone who actually knows Aunt Fennel. What a piece of luck. Patience, patience. It will all be neatly unraveled. Dear Max, I'll just be a little longer than I expected on account of the measles and this job, but it's very temporary. Something tells me strongly that Mrs. Marsham doesn't want me sculling around in her one-woman kingdom longer than strictly necessary, so the end is in sight. She glanced up at the rise of moorland which they were skirting. A sky of plum-gray cumulus had assembled, through which the sun ducked palely. Scurrying cloud shadows over the convex land were exactly the same color as the sky above, but in a darker tone. Far away, on a humped, gloomy shoulder of hill, 3 immense silvery globes were aligned across the slope like beached moons. "What are those things, Aunt Fennel?" "What things, dear?" "Over there." "Too far for my poor eyes. What are they like?" "Round and silver, like balloons, only bigger." "Oh, those something to do with the Russians, dear. When the Russians are coming, I believe they ring a bell. Kind of bicycle bells, I see," Lucy said cheerfully. Aunt Fennel always came out the winner of these little contests, but Lucy bore no ill feeling on that account. She was becoming daily fonder of the old lady. "Not of nonsense, if you ask me," Aunt Fennel went on. "If the Russians did come, I dare say they'd turn out to be like anybody else. Very fond of cucumbers, I believe, and jam in their tea. Nothing wrong with that, if it's homemade jam." Lucy drove slowly, her eyes on the racing purple-black shadows. "Don't you sometimes feel like doing another picture, Aunt Fennel?" she said. She put the question, expecting another fobbed-off answer about weak eyesight, but Aunt Fennel surprised her by saying, "Yes, dearie, sometimes I do. Well, you never know. If there's some old garden room or storeroom at the hall where I could have my bits and pieces and paints, I don't deny it would be rather nice." Lucy almost held her breath. Aunt Fennel was smiling to herself, a sweet, secretive smile, like that of a frail, ancient mouse who has just discovered a whole Stilton cheese. "If my eyes are up to it, of course, but we shall have to see. That matron probably wouldn't allow me," she ended tranquilly. "Fond of her own, you can see that one is. Or fond of her own way, you can see that one is." Where are your picture materials, Aunt Fennel? Why, at the cottage, dearie, at High Beck. Wouldn't you like to go and have a look over the place? See your things aren't getting mildewy or eaten by moths, the old lady considered. Well, I don't know, she said doubtfully. Do you have the key on you? Of course, dearie, of course. I always carry it. Aunt Fennel laid a hand protectively over her diaphragm. Well then, but suppose that other one was still lurking around, waiting for me to come back. Aunt Fennel? Yes, dearie. Who is that other one? Oh, dearie, I couldn't tell you. The old lady sounded appalled at such a suggestion. She pulled out a handkerchief from a little black velvet bag and pressed it against her forehead. Her lips trembled. A violent green flavor of tansy drifted about the car. But why not? If he knew that you knew, he'd be after you too, like as not. Lucy knit her brow over this tangle. But Aunt Fen, what, dearie? Well, dearie? How do you know that I don't know? Well, you just asked me, didn't you? Where'd be the sense in asking if you knew? Oh, gosh, Lucy said. We're going round and round, but what made you certain that I wasn't something to do with that other one? Suppose he really sent me to clobber you. Well, dearie, I was a little doubtful at first. Doubtful, thought Lucy, remembering that haggling pursuit over the shingle. But when I came to know your character, of course, I very soon saw you couldn't have had anything to do with that other one. She's a good little thing, I thought, as soon as I knew your character. A thin bird-like claw came out and patted Lucy's hand on the steering wheel. Lucy gave the claw a squeeze, replaced it gently in the owner's lap, and drove on, feeling unusually humble. Dearie? Yes, Aunt Fen. You are looking out for that tractor, aren't you? Oops, thank you. Not quite my usual care and attention. With a slight grin, Lucy deflected her course. The danger had not been imminent. The tractor, on which was mounted a telescopic crane attachment with a rake and saw blade combined, was chugging slowly along on the other side of the lane, demolishing the hedge to half its height. The driver's attention was concentrated on keeping his chopping attachment tilted to the right angle, at the right angle. He had little to spare for other traffic. None of that sort of thing when I was young, Aunt Fennel said disapprovingly. People cut hedges properly with billhooks in those days instead of leaving them a nasty haggled mess. And as for those roadside sprays, they just ruin the wildflowers. But what about that other one if you come to live at Wildfell Hall? Lucy said, harking back to the previous topic. Shan't you be worried about him there? There'll always be company. He wouldn't dare come into a big, well-run place like that. Besides, he wouldn't expect me to come back there, you see. This sounded rational and was certainly unarguable. Did you know the man driving the tractor? Lucy said irreverently. Good gracious, dearie, I couldn't see as far as that, not to recognize a face. 30 years, thought Lucy. She said mildly, glancing sideways. Your hearing aid is switched off, did you know? I can always hear much better in the car, Aunt Fennel explained serenely. It's the vibrations, I dare say. 4:30. Anybody you'd like to call on in Apley as we pass through? I don't think so, love. Thank you all the same. Dill and I had got so old we didn't bother with seeing neighbours much. Most of our own friends had died long ago. Young folks don't want to be bothered visiting two queer old ladies. Dare say they hardly knew which of us was which. Game and set to Aunt Fennel, Lucy thought. But I would rather like to go and just look at Harbeck, Aunt Fennel ended. Do you think you can get your car up the lane? I'll have a darn good try. But what about that other one? Well, I was thinking, you can lock up the car, can't you? You always lock it when you go off and leave it in that underground car parks place. Sure. So you could lock me inside the car, couldn't you? You went into the cottage. And then, even if that other one was about, he couldn't get me, could he? As so often with Aunt Fennel, Lucy hardly knew whether to laugh, cry, or curse. The old lady's mixture of fantasy and common sense filled her with admiration and despair. Never having lived at close quarters with a car before, Aunt Fennel had taken a huge fancy to little PHO. She was never so happy as when being driven about, no matter where, and now seemed to have endowed the little Austen with magic protective qualities as well. Sure, I could lock you in, that's a fine plan, Lucy said gently. What do you want me to do with the cottage? Well, you could have a little look round and make sure things aren't getting too damp, and yes, you could bring out one or two things, canvases and tubes of paint and my embroidery bits, and all of them are worth saving, if any of them are worth saving. Right then, here we go. Lucy braked to a crawl and turned left up a cart track which paralleled the stream on the opposite bank from the haunted public lavatory. There's a footbridge to the cottage, isn't there? That's right, dearie. There's room to leave the car just this side of the footbridge. Sometimes in really bad weather, when there's been a lot of rain or snow up on the moor, the beck floods right up over the footbridge, and then the cottage is quite cut off. You can't climb the cliff at the back, you see. Well, we couldn't anyway, once we were cut off for 3 weeks. That must have been fun, Lucy remarked, cautiously maneuvering little PHO on up the steep stony track with the steam in its gully below her on the left. Oh, it was, dearie. Aunt Fennel's tone was full of reminiscent pleasure. Of course, we always had plenty of stores of our own. Eggs and vegetables, Dill made the bread, and we had parsnip wine and elderberry jam. What about male fuel? Plenty of wood, and no one ever wrote, except once your Aunt Rose to thank me for the pictures. Delighted with them, she said they were. Lucy felt a pang remembering Aunt Rose. Willoughby told me to write a letter of thanks and put them up in the attic. She'd never know. She said warmly, They were marvellous pictures, Aunt Fen. I especially liked the infant Samuel. Are there any left in the cottage? I dare say, dearie, I really can't remember, the old lady said vaguely. I gave away most of my things when I made up my mind to leave. Old Colonel Linton said he'd take them round to people for me. Very kind he was. When Dill was alive, he often used to come in and have a glass of our homemade wine. Colonel Linton? Would he be the old boy who lives at the vicarage? White hair and rather deaf and short-tempered. He's had a lot of troubles, dearie. Aunt Fennel's tone was reproving. He used to own the hall and all the land around here, you know, but he lost all his money at the races and had to sell up. Very sad, that was. His people had been here since goodness knows when. Another first-hand witness. Good, thought Lucy, edging little PHO away from the precipitous bank of the stream and into a kind of niche in the steep bank on her right. I must go back and have another try at Colonel Linton. She parked and got out by the footbridge. Aunt Fennel began a lengthy rummage among her garments. First, she removed several scarves, then unbuttoned the front of her woolen dress and Liberty bodice. Some hooks about midway down the front of her corset were then unfastened with considerable difficulty. Can I help? Asked Lucy. No, thank you, dearie, I can manage. Ha, here we are. She hauled on a sort of fishing line attached to a safety pin, and up came a little chamois leather bag, worn and creased. This is where I keep the wealth, you see. And once again her face broke into its triumphant smile. Incredulous, Lucy had a momentary glimpse of a thickish wad of currency notes before Aunt Fennel extracted a door key from the middle of the wad, which she replaced in the bag. She then began the complicated process of restowing and rebuttoning. Aunt Fennel, yes, dearie, do you think it's sensible to carry all that about with you? Where else would I carry it, dearie? This seemed unanswerable. But if you've got such a lot of ready cash, why go to all the trouble to change a check at the drugstore? Aunt Fennel was scandalized. This is only for emergencies. Oh, I see. Rather shaken, Lucy got out of the car and carefully locked Aunt Fennel inside it. Shan't be long, she called loudly, emphasizing lip movements, and made her way down to the footbridge. It was a slender affair, made of transverse wooden slats, which were slung on 2 strands of heavy fence wire, triple-twisted. It jigged and swung as Lucy crossed it, and she had to hold on to the wire guardrail on both sides. Below her, the cider-colored beck dashed between mossy stones, down 3 wooden steps to the bridge. What a structure for 2 old ladies to cross every time they went to the village, and then up a stairway of irregular stone slabs to where High Beck Cottage perched, halfway up the bankside. Terraced flower beds in front of the cottage had reverted to wild, but still showed a few marigold and nasturtiums among the tangle of rack growth. 2 granite pig troughs on either side of the front door were full of buttercups. The key turned rustily, and Lucy stepped inside. A smell of dank and cold met her, damp stone primarily, and behind that a whiff of soot and moldering wood. A flight of narrow stairs faced the porch. Doors lay on either side. Lucy chose the left and found herself in a large kitchen with a red-flagged floor. A dresser, a grandfather clock stopped at 20 to 5, a table, and 2 wooden stools. In one wall was set a primitive cooking range with oven, a door at the back led to a scullery, and there were seats inset under the 2 windows, which had heavy wooden shutters pushed back. No pictures on the papered walls. Lucy tried the other little front room, which had evidently been used as a parlor and had trestled wallpaper with roses and bluebirds, very damp and peeling. No pictures here either, but in a fireside cupboard she unearthed a box full of embroidery silks and scraps of material, too sodden and mildewed to be any use. Upstairs, in one of the 2 little bedrooms, stood a stack of old frames and pictures, the kind found in farmhouses, Victorian engravings and watercolors. 1 or 2 of them had been painted over with a matte color, or had a bit of linen stretched across them. Evidently Aunt Fennel had thriftily used these as a base for her own works. Lucy also found some tubes of oil paint, hardened and useless. No pictures. Evidently Colonel Linton had made a clean sweep, or somebody else had. It would of course be easy for anybody to enter the cottage with its broken windows. She turned and looked out of the casement at the tree-filled glen and slender spidery bridge. Down below, out of sight from here, the beck could be heard chattering among the rocks. On the other side, little P.H.O. and Aunt Fennel waited patiently. Lucy turned back to her investigation of the house. She did not know what she had expected to find, only that she was not finding it. Photographs, evidence of identity? There was nothing of that kind. But what met her and engulfed her, stronger than the smell of damp soot, was an almost unbearable sadness, a feeling of betrayal. "You abandoned me. You left me alone to die." "I couldn't help it," Lucy muttered. To whom? To the house? "It wasn't my fault. I wasn't even here." But the reproach went on assailing her until she wanted to press her fingers into her ears, into her heart. It was like a continuous cry of pain. "Thank God I didn't bring Aunt Fennel up here," she thought. "If I feel it so, how could she have borne it? No wonder she left. It's as if there were a curse on the place." Her head had started to throb violently. She picked up an armful of the canvases at random and made her way awkwardly down the narrow stairs with them. Pausing in the kitchen to rearrange the load, she was overtaken by a giddy spell and had to wait, leaning against the doorpost, till her sight cleared. For a moment she had the mad impression that she could see 2 images, one superimposed on the other, like a 3-color picture out of register. She saw the kitchen, furnished, sunlit, fire in the range, cat asleep on a rag hearthrug, wallflowers in a brass pot on the table, a pastry board. The picture faded. "Hell's bells," Lucy murmured. "Seeing spooks yet? I'm getting out of here." "Come back," the little house entreated as she dumped her load of canvases and turned to lock the door. "Please, please, come back." Then ominously, "You will come back. You'll have to come back." "Oh, yeah? You have got a hope." She stuck the key in her pocket and hitched up the canvases once more. A tabby cat, the one she had seen on her former visit, wrinkled its nose at her in a silent hiss and fled around a water butt. Lucy picked her way cautiously down the stone steps. She felt drained and sick. Her head still throbbed. Negotiating the unsteady swing bridge with the canvases took all her concentration. She made her way slowly back along the track to little P.H.O. Aunt Fennel appeared to be dozing, chin on chest, and started violently when Lucy unlocked the car door. "I've got some canvases, Aunt Fennel, but the embroidery things weren't worth bringing. Too damp, all rotten. I'll put these in the trunk." She did so, then sank into the driver's seat. "Out of the house, seem dearie." how to explain or how to conceal that frightening miasma of grief and reproach. "Oh, well, it was rather dusty and damp," she said. "You have to expect that when a house is empty," Aunt Fennel said placidly. "Otherwise, everything all right. You look a bit pale, dearie. You didn't see anybody, no one about, not that other one." She sank her voice to a whisper. "No, nobody. It's just one of my headaches has hit me. I'll be better in a minute." "Oh, well, now, we know that's what's good for that, don't we? Comfrey tablets and a sniff of my rosemary essence. Such a good thing, Mrs. Tilney. Let me use her kitchen to make some. I can't swallow a tablet just now, Aunt Fennel, bless you. But the rosemary's lovely, a big heap. Let's get out of here, shall we?" The whole glen for Lucy now seemed filled with the cottage's aura. She could not wait to leave. Craning her head out of the window, she backed dangerously fast down the rough track until there was room to turn and rejoin the main village road. Her call on Colonel Linton at the vicarage would have to wait. She did not feel she had the stamina to deal with him at present. But halfway along the village, she braked. "Aunt Fennel, I think I will try to take a couple of your pills. And I'm dying for a drink of water. There's a girl living in that cottage who'd give me one, I dare say. Could you bear to wait another couple of minutes, or will you come in too?" "Oh, I'll wait, dearie, thank you. You can lock me in again. Baker's cottage. Let's see. That was empty when I left. Wonder who's in it now." "People called Carados, strangers in the village," Lucy supplied obligingly as she relocked the car. The name apparently meant nothing to Aunt Fennel, who settled herself placidly. "Yes," said Fiona Carados, opening the door. "Oh, it's you again. What do you want?" "I wondered if you'd be kind enough—" "Oh," said Lucy. "You've had your baby, then?" "It does happen. Old Dame Nature's way," Mrs. Carados rejoined coolly. "That wasn't what you came to tell me, however." No, sorry. Could you be very kind and let me have a glass of water to take a couple of pills with, do you think? I've got a splitting headache." "You do look rotten." A trace of sympathy became apparent in Mrs. Carados's well-bred voice. "Come into the kitchen and sit down. Sure you wouldn't rather have a whiskey?" She seemed a great deal more relaxed than on Lucy's previous visit. "No, just water's all I want, thanks." The kitchen this time was in slightly less baleful condition of clutter. Faintly here and there signs of tidying up were apparent. A very minute infant slept in a Moses blanket on the floor. "That's my bub, isn't he funny?" said Fiona, handing Lucy a thick white mug of very cold water. "You can't have had him long. Isn't it rather soon for you to be home from hospital?" "I never got there. By the time I began to feel a bit queer, it was too late. Even the old sawbones didn't arrive till it was all over." "Good heavens!" Lucy swallowed the tablets and eyed her hostess with respect. "Must have been scary for your husband." "Oh, he wasn't here either. I'd slung him out. Horrid little tick. Anyway, he wasn't my husband," explained Fiona, in whom childbirth seemed to have worked a liberating change. Lucy found it hard to think of an appropriate comment. "I see," she said, and took another swig of water. "It's marvellous not to have Robin skulking furtively around being ashamed of my non-maternal status," Robin confided. "Only thing, I'll have to find a way of earning some cash. How's the head?" "Improving, thanks. What did you do before? Ran a boutique in the King's Road. Sure you're okay?" "Yes, much better. I ought to get back to my aunt, and thanks a lot." "You're welcome. Something tells me," Fiona said, glancing through the window at the desolate main street of Appleby under Scar, "that there wouldn't be much demand for a boutique hereabouts." "I guess not." "I suppose you couldn't lend me a fiver," Fiona remarked suddenly and casually. "Bloody little Robin, don't you see, doesn't send me anything at all. Now though the baby's his, but the rent here's paid up till December, so I'm damn well not shifting till then." "Well," Lucy was not particularly keen to part with her own scanty cash. She hesitated. "Or you can make it a sale if you don't like loans," Fiona went on. "Buy something, anything you fancy. How about my old bit of rabbit?" She gestured toward a shaggy bundle. Could it be Sable, slung carelessly over the handlebar of a pram? "Thanks, but you'll be wanting it yourself here come winter. Anyhow, I'm not crazy about fur." Suddenly, Lucy was visited by a brilliant idea. "Tell you what, though, that picture you had over the sitting room mantelpiece, is it still there? Could I have that?" "Good God, yes. Can't think why you want it, but have it by all means. Your landlord won't object." If he does, I'll tell him the baby was sick on it. Shouldn't think he'd notice, actually. For one thing, he hardly ever comes to the house. Doesn't care for the setup, Fiona said dispassionately. Here, I'll reach it down for you, thanks, as Lucy dug out 5-pound notes. That'll keep us in Cowingate and Scotch for a week or so. That's good. Covetously hugging Adam and Eve and the serpent, Lucy made her way toward the door. By the way, Fiona said casually, weren't you looking for some old girl with a funny name last time you were this way? Culpepper? Vanilla Culpepper, something like that? Yes, I was. Lucy paused with her hand on the door handle. Why? I just wondered if you'd found her, that was all. To be honest, said Lucy, I really couldn't tell you. And that's the end of chapter 7.